I had exactly 184.37 in my checking account, a fresh incision running under my ribs from surgery 12 days earlier, and a sealed USB drive in the pocket of my coat when my late father's widow smiled across a linen-covered table and told me the family foundation was no longer my concern. The amount she had moved was $480,000. Not almost, not approximately. Exactly $480,000 from a scholarship fund my mother built before she died. I remember noticing that one of my earrings didn't match the other. That is the kind of useless detail your mind holds on to when something important is breaking. The gala around us kept glittering. Glasses clinked. A jazz trio played too softly to offend anyone. Across the room, a banner carried my father's name in gold lettering. In my pocket, that USB felt heavier than bone. 2 hours later, a probate lawyer would tell me there was still one legal path left. Let me take you back. My name is Naomi Mercer. I was 43 then, a forensic accountant by trade, the kind who notices when numbers hesitate before they lie. I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, where old money liked to pretend it was just good manners with better landscaping. My father, Hal Mercer, had spent 40 years building commercial properties, country club friendships, and a public image sturdy enough to survive almost anything except the truth. He died on a Wednesday in late September after a stroke that landed like weather. Fast, unanswered, final. I was still recovering from gallbladder surgery when he passed. Nothing glamorous. Just one of those procedures people call routine until you are the one trying to stand up without seeing stars. My doctor had told me not to lift anything heavier than 10 pounds. Grief, apparently, did not count. My father's widow, Celeste, called me the morning after the funeral and spoke in that honeyed tone people use when they are trying to sound wounded and managerial at the same time. "Naomi, I know this is hard," she said, "but some decisions need to be made quickly." That was Celeste. She was 61, composed, lacquered, exact. She never raised her voice because she never had to. She had married my father 14 years earlier when he was lonely, tired, and flattered by a woman who made every room look better by entering it. Her son, Gavin, was 36, handsome in a curated way, with expensive stubble, and the posture of a man who had always mistaken access for merit. When my father married Celeste, people said she softened him. What she really did was reorganize him. New house staff, new travel habits, new friends. Old photographs disappeared gradually, like they had wandered off on their own. I knew about golden child systems because I had lived inside one. Gavin was the arriving prince. I was the daughter from the first marriage who knew too much history. My father never said it plainly, but he practiced it fluently. When I was 16, he missed my state debate finals because Gavin had a minor fender bender in Hilton Head. "He's shaken up," my father told me on the phone. "You understand." I did understand. I understood that a boy with a dented Lexus could outweigh a girl holding a first-place medal in a polyester blazer. The second memory was smaller and worse. 3 years before he died, I brought him quarterly summaries for the Mercer Family Foundation, the charitable arm my mother had started to fund trade school and nursing scholarships for foster youth. I had volunteered to clean up the books after a sloppy outside bookkeeper missed several reporting deadlines. My father barely looked at the work. Celeste stood beside his desk with one hand resting on the back of his chair and said, almost playfully, "Naomi always did love sorting other people's messes." My father smiled without looking up. "That's because she's practical." Practical. Not brilliant, not trusted, not necessary. Practical. A nice word used like a mop. I put the folder down, said nothing, and drove home in silence, so complete I could hear my own jaw ache. After his funeral, the first document Celeste sent was not a condolence note, not foundation guidance, not a family schedule. It was a notice for a special board meeting attached to the Mercer Hope Initiative, the renamed Scholarship Fund. The rebrand had happened quietly 6 months earlier. I had objected to the new name then. Celeste told me, "Your mother would have wanted the mission modernized." People say things for the dead all the time. The dead have terrible representation. The board meeting was set for the following Monday at 4 p.m. in a conference room above one of my father's downtown properties. At the bottom, in bold, was one sentence: "If you miss this, you lose everything." That line was from the probate attorney's office, not Celeste's. It referred to my right to contest any immediate asset transfers tied to amendments executed in my father's final 30 days. Miss the meeting, miss the filing window, miss the provisional injunction. It was as clean as that. I read it twice, then lowered the paper and felt the incision in my side pull when I stood too fast. I called Owen Price, the probate litigator my firm sometimes used for complex estate disputes. He was 52, spare, calm, and never in a hurry unless a deadline was about to become expensive. He met me at his office that afternoon. I handed him the meeting notice, my father's last known trust summary, and a bottle of water I never opened. He read quietly, then tapped the page once. "They're moving fast because they think you're weak," he said. "I had surgery 12 days ago." That would qualify. I sat back slowly. Can they move foundation money before probate settles? He adjusted his glasses. Not legally if it was restricted, not cleanly if there are fiduciary duties, not safely if they forged anything. Bring me board minutes, bank records, trustee signatures, and anything with metadata. I may have something. May? A former assistant of my father's asked to meet. She said she found a drive he wanted me to have. That got his attention. "Go get it," he said. "And Naomi?" "Yes. If you miss this, you lose everything." I picked up the phone face down. Then I went. The former assistant's name was Marisol Vega. She had worked for my father for 11 years, always impeccably efficient, always invisible in the way competent women are often trained to be around wealthy men who like applause more than accuracy. She asked me to meet her not at an office but at a small bakery on King Street at 6:15 after the downtown crowds had thinned. When I arrived, she was already in a corner booth with tea she had not touched. She slid a white envelope across the table without preamble. "He asked me to give this to you if anything felt wrong after his death," she said. Did he say what wrong meant? Her face changed in a way that was almost pity. He said, "If Celeste starts talking about efficiency, Naomi will know." Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a folded note in my father's handwriting. 3 lines. "If they move the scholarship money, check the addendum. Not everyone at the gala is who they claim to be. Trust dates, not stories." I read it twice. My father had never been tender, but he had always been exact. Even then, even late. "Why now?" I asked. Marisol looked down briefly. "Because I quit 2 months ago after Gavin asked me to backdate a board consent form. I refused. He found someone else." The room seemed to narrow. "Do you have proof?" "Only that he asked, but the drive may." That night, Owen and I sat in his office with the lights low and the USB open on his conference screen. There were scanned PDFs, export logs, revised board resolutions, and a folder titled Final Eusethis, which is the kind of file name guilty people choose when they believe confidence is a system of capitalization. The second folder changed everything. Inside it sat 3 versions of a trust addendum relating to the Mercer Hope Scholarship Fund. Each file had creation dates, edit histories, and PDF metadata preserved from the office management software Gavin had apparently forgotten to scrub. The earliest version, drafted 8 months before my father's death, maintained the scholarship restriction exactly as my mother had written it. Funds could only be used for direct educational grants and living stipends for approved recipients. The second version inserted Celeste as interim discretionary overseer. The third version, created 11 days before my father died, added Gavin as co-authorized signatory on strategic redeployment initiatives, which is rich people's language for "give me the money and trust me not to be ugly with it." But the real piece was buried deeper. A page labeled Addendum C7, a canary clause. My mother's lawyer had inserted it 20 years earlier, and my father had never removed it. If any acting trustee, spouse, board member, or family beneficiary attempted to redirect restricted scholarship assets for personal gain, all discretionary gifts and housing allowances connected to the Mercer Residential Trust could be suspended immediately upon prima facie evidence of fraud pending judicial review. I looked at Owen. He looked back at me. "That house on Murray Boulevard," I said. "The one Celeste lives in," he said, "is trust held." "So are the monthly distributions?" He nodded. "If this clause holds, yes." I stared at the screen. My side hurt. My mouth had gone dry. "This isn't revenge," Owen said quietly, reading my face before I spoke. "This is justice." I nodded once. "I know." He pointed to another file. "Keep going." There were wire authorizations totaling $480,000 sent from the scholarship reserve to an LLC called Harbor Crest Advisory Group. Owen pulled the state registration in under a minute. Gavin Mercer, managing member. A shell with a brass nameplate and no staff. I let out a breath so sharp it stung. Not because I was surprised, because somewhere inside me there had still been a child expecting to be wrong. The next morning, I made my first mistake. I called my older cousin Elise, who had known my mother well and sat on several local nonprofit boards. I thought I was asking for moral ballast. What I was really asking for was permission to stop feeling alone. "Elise," I said, "if I contest this publicly, it's going to get ugly." There was a pause. Then she said, "Are you sure you want to humiliate your father's widow at a memorial season gala?" That wording hit me wrong. Not challenge. Not expose, humiliate. I felt something cold settle into place. "Who told you about the gala?" I asked. Another pause, slightly longer. "Celeste mentioned you seemed emotional." There it was. My flaw has always been delay disguised as dignity. I wait too long because I would rather be fair than fast. That phone call cost me 6 hours. By noon, 2 foundation accounts had been moved again, and an emergency board packet went out recommending temporary suspension of scholarship disbursements due to restructuring. 4 students due for winter housing grants were suddenly left floating. I sat in my car outside my office and pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes. Then I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Owen filed for an immediate temporary restraining order and asset freeze by 2:40 p.m. We attached the metadata logs, the shell company registration, the scholarship restrictions, and Marisol's sworn affidavit about the backdating request. A judge in Charleston County granted a limited emergency hold pending hearing at 9:00 a.m. the next morning. The courtroom went silent the first time Celeste realized we had more than suspicion. But that comes later. First came the gala. My father's memorial gala had been scheduled months before as the annual Mercer Hope Donor event. Hosted that year at the Charleston Maritime Exchange, all white columns and riverlight and money pretending it was philanthropy. Celeste refused to cancel it after the funeral. Hal would have wanted continuity, she told local press. Of course he would have. Continuity is what people call it when they need the room to stay expensive. Owen told me not to attend unless I could keep control. "I can keep control," I said. "Can you keep silence?" "Yes." "Good," he said. "Because noise helps them." We went with a narrow plan. Let Celeste and Gavin speak. Let them commit publicly. Then force the contradiction with documents already filed. Small reveal, bigger reveal, nuclear only if needed. At 7:10 p.m., I entered wearing a black dress that still hung a little loose because surgery, recovery, and grief do not respect tailoring. I moved carefully. I remember the smell of orange peel from someone's drink. I remember the donor wall lit warm enough to flatter everyone. And I remembered my father's note. Not everyone at the gala is who they claim to be. At 7:26 p.m., I learned what he meant. The catering director, a soft-spoken man with silver hair I vaguely recognized from my father's club events, approached while I was standing alone near the rear doors. "Ms. Mercer," he said, "I'm Thomas Bell." I nodded politely. He handed me a folded place card. Inside was one line, FBI Financial Crimes Task Force, attending as donor guest. Do not react. I looked up. He gave the smallest possible shake of his head, alley identity twist. My father had known something was wrong, or at least dangerous enough to leave breadcrumbs, Thomas Bell was not there for the shrimp skewers. At 7:40 p.m., Celeste took the stage. She spoke beautifully. She always had. She thanked donors, invoked my father's vision, and announced a bold strategic repositioning of the Mercer Hope Initiative toward entrepreneurial mobility solutions. That phrase meant nothing to actual students but sounded wonderful to people who mistook branding for mercy. Then she said, "My son Gavin has generously agreed to help steward this next chapter." There it was. Public commitment. Polite applause followed. Gavin stepped up beside her and smiled with the relaxed confidence of a man who thought the room had already voted. I could feel Owen beside me, still as a wall. Celeste continued, "In difficult seasons, families must trust the people willing to do the hard work. Dramatic irony is a strange thing. Half the room heard resilience. I heard a woman walking barefoot over filed exhibits. When she finished, the MC invited board members and family to join a donor acknowledgement photo on stage. Owen looked at me. "Now or after the photo?" "After," I said. He nodded once. The photo began. Board members climbed the steps. Donors leaned in. Gavin put a hand at Celeste's back like the future belonged to him. Then the venue screens behind them flickered. For 1 second I thought we had lost power. One of my 3 uniqueness seeds had been a possible outage, but this was not weather. This was input override. The donor logo vanished. In its place appeared a single screenshot from the state corporate registry. Harbor Crest Advisory Group, LLC, managing member, Gavin Mercer. Murmurs started immediately, small at first, then contagious. Celeste turned. Gavin froze. The screen advanced to a wire transfer authorization for $480,000 from Mercer Hope Scholarship Reserve, then to the scholarship restriction language from my mother's original trust, then to the metadata panel showing the addendum creation date and user credentials used to edit it. No one screamed. Wealthy people almost never do. They inhale sharply and begin recalculating seating arrangements. Gavin moved first, stepping toward the AV table at the side of the room. Thomas Bell was already there. He did not touch Gavin, he just showed credentials. Gavin stopped like a man who had reached the end of a hallway he thought was longer. Celeste recovered faster. "This is outrageous," she said into the live microphone, voice steady but thinner than before. "These are incomplete internal drafts being misrepresented by a disgruntled former employee and my husband's unstable daughter." That line landed hard, not because it was true, because it was designed for old wounds. For 1 second, the room blurred at the edges. Unstable daughter. There it was again, practical, emotional, too much, the same old reduction in a dress with pearls. Owen stepped forward before I did. "Counsel for Ms. Mercer," he said, calm enough to cool steel. A temporary restraining order and asset freeze were issued at 2:43 p.m. today. All trustees and involved parties have been served. Any further representations tonight should be made with care. That was the bigger reveal. The nuclear one arrived on its own. Because Thomas Bell, donor guest and federal task force officer, asked one clear question loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "Mrs. Mercer, were you aware this scholarship reserve was used as collateral language in a pending personal line of credit application attached to your residential trust distributions?" You could feel the room physically change. Collateral. Personal. Residential trust. That linked the money to the house. And the house, thanks to the canary clause, was the elegant knife. Celeste looked at Gavin. Gavin looked nowhere. That was answer enough. She lowered the microphone. "I want a private room." Owen said, "You may want counsel first." The gala did not end with shouting. It ended with clusters, donors speaking in low voices, 2 board members leaving through the side entrance, a local pastor who had served on the foundation board for years, removing his name badge and setting it quietly on a linen tablecloth as if returning something he should never have borrowed. I put the phone face down. Then I waited. The hearing the next morning moved faster than most people think real life does, because urgency clarifies the law. We were not there to try every moral question in one sitting. We were there for immediate relief. Celeste arrived in cream. Gavin arrived gray around the mouth. Their attorney tried the obvious path first: grief, confusion, administrative overlap, evolving donor strategy, unauthorized access to draft files. Then Owen stood and walked the judge through the sequence with the patience of a man placing stones across water. Original scholarship restriction, metadata history, Shell LLC, wire route, affidavit, backdating request, emergency account movement after probable notice, credit application referencing redirected funds, and finally, the canary clause. He explained each term in plain language because good lawyers do not hide behind vocabulary when clarity can win sooner. Your Honor, he said, a canary clause is a protective trigger inserted to detect and penalize precisely this kind of attempted misappropriation. Once there is prima facie evidence of fraud, distributions tied to the implicated beneficiaries may be suspended. Here, that includes housing allowances and discretionary support from the residential trust. The courtroom went silent. Judges hear lies all day. What changes a room is not accusation, it is sequence. Celeste's attorney objected to intent. The judge overruled enough to matter. Gavin tried to speak once. The judge stopped him. At 10:14 a.m., the court entered an expanded asset freeze, suspended all discretionary distributions connected to the residential trust, prohibited transfer or encumbrance of the Murray Boulevard property, reinstated independent oversight of the scholarship fund, and referred the financial irregularities to state investigators with copies to the existing federal inquiry. No handcuffs, no television drama, just paper-changing gravity. The fallout unfolded over months, which is how real consequence usually works. Investigators found that Gavin had used Harbor Crest to route not just the $480,000 scholarship transfer, but two smaller vendor payments tied to program consulting. One was pure fiction. The other paid a designer to prepare pitch materials for Celeste's private legacy wellness retreat concept in Asheville, apparently intended to be seeded by donor money once the scholarship fund was hollowed out enough to rename. Marisol's affidavit held. The metadata held. The banking trail held. So did Thomas Bell's task force reporting, though most of that stayed far outside public view. The board removed Celeste within 3 weeks. 2 members resigned. One donor family publicly redirected its annual contribution to a separate youth housing nonprofit. 4 delayed students received emergency grants after the court appointed a temporary independent fiduciary to restore disbursements. And the canary clause did exactly what my mother designed it to do 20 years earlier. Celeste's housing allowance stopped. The trust-owned home remained frozen pending broader litigation. She could live there temporarily under court conditions, but the comfort was gone. So was the illusion of permanence. Gavin settled the civil claims before trial after his own attorney, a practical woman with tired eyes, explained what juries tend to do when scholarship money meant for foster kids gets rerouted through an LLC with your name on it. He agreed to restitution, penalties, and a multi-year bar on serving as officer or manager of any charitable entity tied to the estate resolution. His separate exposure with investigators was handled elsewhere and with less publicity than gossip would have preferred. Celeste fought longer. People like her often do, not because they believe they will win, but because they mistake endurance for innocence. She challenged the clause, the freeze, the affidavits, my standing, my motives. She even suggested I engineered the conflict because I resented my father's remarriage. Owen answered every filing the same way he answered the first one. Calmly, with exhibits. There is a special kind of humiliation in losing to paperwork when your whole life has been built on performance. My father, for his part, remained complicated even in death. The note, the breadcrumbs, the preserved clause, they did not make him noble. They made him late. I had to live with that. He had seen enough to leave me tools, but not enough, or not bravely enough, to stop it while he was alive. That was the hardest truth of all. Justice can restore money. It cannot retroactively produce courage. 1 year later, I was standing in a renovated brick building on Meeting Street that now housed the restored Mercer Trade and Nursing Scholarship Office. And a 19-year-old student named Brianna was telling me she had signed her first apartment lease without a cosigner because her transitional housing stipend had come through on time. She was trying not to cry, which usually means the crying is real. "We're naming the emergency fund after your mother, right?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Ruth Mercer." She smiled. "Good." My life looked quieter by then. Better, too. The incision had healed. I had stepped back from one major corporate client and started a smaller advisory practice focused on nonprofit compliance and forensic review. Not glamorous. Useful. I slept through the night more often. I cooked more. I answered fewer calls from people who only liked me when I was swallowing things. Celeste moved to a condo in Naples, Florida, paid for partly by assets not touched by the fraud carve-out but diminished enough that old friends discovered scheduling conflicts with unusual frequency. She still appeared in magazines occasionally, smaller now, more local. Gavin was reportedly consulting for a marina supply company owned by someone willing to believe reinvention is the same as repentance. Maybe he had changed, maybe he had not. It no longer belonged to me. What belonged to me was simpler. Boundaries are not cruelty. Documentation is not pettiness. And the people who call you difficult when you ask for the truth were usually counting on your silence. So let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone mistake your calm for weakness right before the facts caught up with them? If you know that feeling, subscribe and stay with me for the next story. End of the story.